To the west, Chile; to the northwest, Peru; to the north and east are the vast lands of Brazil; to the south, Argentina; and to the southeast, Paraguay. Right there, locked between all five, sits Bolivia, a nation in the heart of South America, completely sealed off from the rest of the world. But if you look at old maps, you'll notice something remarkable. Bolivia once had a beautiful Pacific coastline, its own ports, its own beaches, its own gateway to the world. Today, not a single drop of that ocean belongs to Bolivia. So what happened? How does an entire coastline just disappear? How did Bolivia go from a proud coastal nation to one of the most isolated landlocked countries on Earth? And why, and after more than 140 years, has Bolivia still never gotten it back? In the 1500s, the Spanish Empire seized control of this region. Then came a discovery that changed everything. Cerro Rico, the mountain of Potosi, bursting with silver. Spain wasted no time. It forced the indigenous people into brutal labor and shipped the wealth straight to Europe. Thousands died in those mines, yet the extraction never stopped. And the people of this land, they saw none of it. The land was rich, its people were not. Then, in the early 1800s, something shifted. Between 1810 and 1820, resistance began to rise. Small guerrilla groups emerged in the mountains, launching quick strikes on Spanish forces before vanishing into the rugged terrain. Villages quietly fed and sheltered these fighters. And from within this movement rose an unlikely leader, Juana Azurduy, a woman who commanded troops in battle and refused to let the struggle die. The fight for freedom was no longer isolated. It was spreading across an entire continent. At the same time, one name rose above all others: Simon Bolivar, a man who didn't just want freedom for one nation, but for every nation in South America. By his side stood Antonio José de Sucre, a military mind as brilliant as Bolivar was visionary. Together, they pushed Spain to the edge. At the Battle of Ayacucho, Sucre's forces met the last major Spanish army in South America. When the smoke cleared, Spain was finished, its grip on an entire continent gone. In 1825, a new nation was born, Bolivia. Named in honor of the man who dared to dream of a free continent, Antonio José de Sucre became its first president. Centuries of colonial rule over. When Bolivia declared independence in 1825, it wasn't just gaining freedom, it was inheriting a coastline. Roughly 400 kilometers of Pacific shore, sitting between the 23rd and 26th parallel south. Bolivia was not a landlocked country, but there was a problem, and it was buried in the desert. The colonial borders that Bolivia and Chile inherited from Spain were never properly drawn in the Atacama Desert. Bolivia claimed the land down to the 25th parallel. Chile insisted its boundary reached the 23rd. Between those two lines, a barren strip of desert, and neither side was willing to let it go. For a while, the dispute stayed quiet, just two neighbors disagreeing over an empty desert. But then came the discovery that made that desert anything but empty. Beneath the cracked, lifeless surface of the Atacama, silver, copper, and most importantly, sodium nitrate. In the mid-1800s, nitrates were the most valuable industrial resource on the planet, essential for fertilizer, essential for gunpowder. Whoever controlled the Atacama didn't just control desert, they controlled wealth. Bolivia held the port of Antofagasta, but it was Chilean businessmen, backed by British money, who were actually doing the mining. Bolivia had political control, Chile had the economic power. And that contradiction, it was a ticking clock. Both nations knew this couldn't last. So in 1866, they sat down and signed a treaty. The Boundary Treaty, fixing the official border at the 24th parallel. A shared tax zone was created between the 23rd and 25th parallels, with both governments splitting the mineral revenues equally. On paper, it looked like peace. In practice, created nothing but arguments over tax rights, customs collection, and who was getting their fair share. By 1874, a revised treaty replaced the old one. Bolivia kept sovereignty over Antofagasta, but Chile extracted one critical guarantee. Bolivia could not raise taxes on Chilean companies operating in its territory for 25 years. The company at the center of it all? The Antofagasta Nitrate and Railway Company, a Chilean-British enterprise that had quietly come to dominate the entire region. By the late 1870s, this was no longer just a border dispute. This was a battle over territory, mineral wealth, foreign investment, and regional power. And it was about to explode. By the early 1870s, the cracks were already forming. Bolivia and Chile were locked in a bitter argument over the Atacama Desert and its mineral wealth. Meanwhile, in the north, Peru was watching quietly and nervously. Peru's entire economy ran on nitrate exports, and Chilean companies were expanding fast. If Chile gained control over Bolivia's coastal territories, Peru knew exactly what came next. Chile would dominate the entire nitrate trade, and Peru would be left behind. On February 6, 1873, Bolivia and Peru sat down in Lima and signed what would become one of the most consequential and dangerous agreements in South American history. The Secret Treaty of Defensive Alliance, 11 articles, plus one secret article, and its message was simple. If either country were ever attacked by Chile, the other was legally bound to respond. They would fight together or not at all. In late 1878, Bolivia made a decision that would cost it everything. Under the 1874 treaty, Bolivia had made one promise to Chile, not to raise taxes on Chilean mining companies operating in Bolivian territory. Not for 25 years. It was a simple guarantee. 4 years later, a new tax was announced on the Antofagasta Nitrate and Railway Company, a Chilean-British enterprise operating right in the heart of Bolivian territory. The company refused to pay, arguing the tax directly violated the treaty. Bolivia didn't back down. Instead, it threatened to seize the company's assets and auction them off publicly. Chile's response was immediate and cold: cancel the tax or face the consequences. Bolivia refused. So on February 14, 1879, Valentine's Day, Chilean soldiers landed at Antofagasta, Bolivia's most important port. There was no battle. Bolivia had no navy. No soldiers were stationed at the port. No resistance was possible. Chilean forces simply walked in and took it. The port fell in hours. Bolivia was stunned. Bolivia immediately invoked the 1873 treaty, calling on Peru to honor its promise and enter the war. Peru, to its credit, made one final attempt at peace. It sent diplomats. It tried to negotiate. Chile wasn't interested. Chile gave Peru a choice as simple as it was brutal: stay neutral or be treated as an enemy. Peru chose loyalty over safety, and with that single decision, what had started as a tax dispute between two neighbors exploded into a full-scale three-nation war, a conflict that would reshape the entire map of South America forever. History would call it the War of the Pacific. 5 weeks after Chile captured Antofagasta, without firing a single shot, Bolivia finally responded. On March 23, 1879, a small Bolivian cavalry force of around 135 soldiers, led by Colonel Ladislao Cabrera, confronted Chilean troops near the Topata River in the Atacama Desert. The battle was short. Chile's army was larger, better trained, and more heavily armed. Bolivia fought back bravely, but was quickly defeated. Although it was only a small clash, the Battle of Topata became historically important. It marked the first military confrontation between Bolivia and Chile, the moment the conflict ceased to be diplomatic and became open war. On May 26, 1880, the War of the Pacific reached its bloodiest and most decisive moment. On the plains of Alto de la Alianza, just 5 kilometers north of the city of Tacna in southern Peru, two sides lined up for what both knew would be a defining battle. On one side, Chile has roughly 9,000 soldiers. On the other side, the combined armies of Bolivia and Peru, approximately 8,500 to 10,000 men, were fighting not just for territory, but for survival. The battle lasted almost 5 hours. 5 hours to decide the fate of two nations. When the smoke finally cleared, Chile had won. Bolivia and Peru had thrown everything they had at this battle, and it wasn't enough. For Bolivia, this was not just a military loss. Every single kilometer of Bolivia's 400-kilometer Pacific coastline gone forever. Bolivia would never fight for its coast again. Peru didn't escape either. The Tarapacá province, 58,000 square kilometers of the richest nitrate land on the planet, was stripped away. The province of Tacna fell under Chilean military occupation. Its fate left hanging in the air like an open wound. In 5 hours, the map of South America had changed permanently. After breaking the Allied army at Tacna, Chile set its sights on one remaining prize, the port of Arica. It was the last major defensive position held by the Peru-Bolivia alliance. If Chile took Arica, it would control the entire southern Pacific coast. On June 7, 1880, Chile attacked with nearly 5,000 soldiers. About an hour, Chilean forces reached the top. More than 1,000 Peruvian defenders died or were wounded. Chile lost around 500 men. When the battle ended, Arica belonged to Chile. The last stronghold had fallen. Now Chile controlled every major port along its own coast, all the way north to southern Peru. After Bolivia's army collapsed at the Battle of Tacna, the country had no choice but to stop fighting. On April 4, 1884, Bolivia and Chile signed the Pact of Truce of Valparaiso. But this was not a peace treaty. It was only a temporary truce, a pause in the war. Under this truce, Chile kept control of Bolivia's entire coastline. Bolivia had to accept this arrangement, but the truce did not permanently settle who owned the land. 20 years after the War of the Pacific, Bolivia and Chile finally signed a permanent peace agreement, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, on October 20, 1904. This treaty officially ended the long dispute between the two countries. Under the agreement, Bolivia permanently gave up its entire Pacific coastline to Chile. The treaty used the word perpetuity, meaning the transfer of territory would last forever. This legally closed Bolivia's claim to the lost coastal region. In exchange, Chile made promises, a railway to connect Bolivia's highlands to Chilean ports, plus special trade deals so Bolivian goods could move freely. For Bolivia, this was a forced choice. Land connectivity instead of sovereignty. Many Bolivians still call this treaty the deepest betrayal in their nation's history. They lost the sea on paper, and the wound has never healed. In 1975, Bolivia and Chile made a surprising attempt to address Bolivia's long-standing problem of lacking a coastline. The talks became known as the Charaña negotiations because they began near the Bolivian town of Charaña, close to the border with Chile. Chile proposed giving Bolivia a narrow corridor of land connecting it to the Pacific Ocean, north of the city of Arica. If accepted, Bolivia would once again have direct access to the sea for the first time since the War of the Pacific. But there was one problem. Peru. Under the 1929 Treaty of Lima, a secret clause was inserted preventing Chile from transferring Arica to any third party without Peru's consent. This clause would later become a hidden wall, blocking Bolivia's most realistic path to coastal access. Chile offered nothing else. The negotiations collapsed completely. In 2006, both countries launched the 13-point agenda, a major diplomatic effort that included discussions about Bolivia's request for sovereign access to the sea. For several years, the talks created hope that relations between the two nations were improving. However, no final agreement was reached, and the negotiations slowly collapsed once again. Finally, in April 2013, Bolivia sued Chile at the International Court of Justice, ICJ. It argued that Chile had a legal duty to negotiate sovereign access to the sea. Chile responded that it had no such obligation under the 1904 treaty or any later agreement. On October 1, 2018, the ICJ delivered its final verdict. By a vote of 12-3, the court ruled in Chile's favor. It declared that Chile was not legally bound to negotiate a sovereign sea outlet for Bolivia. The 1904 treaty remained in full force. With that decision, Bolivia's final major attempt to recover its coastline ended in defeat. The door to the sea, for now, remains closed. And yet, Bolivia still has a navy. Thousands of men and women train on Lake Titicaca and the rivers of the Amazon, preparing for an ocean their country lost more than 140 years ago. Every year, on March 23rd, Bolivia marks the Day of the Sea. Flags are raised, speeches are given, and the whole country remembers the coastline it once had and still hopes to get back one day. Some call it stubbornness. Bolivia calls it hope.